Right. Good morning. Thank you all so much for being here on a very rainy Wednesday morning. Grateful to have those of you with us who are here in person. And we are also joined by folks virtually as well. Thank you all for spending the next 90 minutes with us this morning. So this is our third installment in our SCORE Institute summer series focused on preparing Tennessee students for careers. And this month, we are focusing on Tennessee's rural students and the opportunities we have to create pathways from education to career through unique collaboratives and collaborations and relationships that are built specifically for these students. So in Tennessee, nearly 1 in 3 students attend school in a rural area. And I'm sure that each of you attending today know that our rural communities in Tennessee are an essential part of our economy, of our culture, and of what makes Tennessee a great place to live. We also know that students, educators, employers in rural regions of our state face unique barriers as well, such as distance, resource scarcity. And these barriers are having an impact, have had an impact, and are having an impact on key student outcomes that prevent education success and workforce readiness for Tennessee. For example, studies show that rural students have fewer dual enrollment course options in high school, one of the early post-secondary opportunities that allows students to earn credits while in high school toward future post-secondary opportunity. Further, the college going rate for rural students, or the number of high school graduates who immediately enroll in a TCAT community college or university, is about 2 points below the statewide average. So rural Tennessee also faces, in addition to some of those education challenges, economic challenges that can impact a student's trajectory from education into the workforce. Tennessee has 35 counties considered at risk or distress, and 26 of these counties are in rural areas. So these counties are designated as at risk or distressed because they have high levels of unemployment, poverty, and low income population. I want to note in particular that the Lee administration has significantly prioritized rural communities in our state, and we now have the fewest number of counties in the stress category than ever before in our state's history. To continue building on that progress over the last few years, we have to ensure that rural students are connected to workforce opportunities. And the education system has a really critical and important role to play in making sure that students can achieve economic independence in sometimes challenging conditions. Today, we'll be highlighting the idea of rural collaboratives, sort of formal rural relationships between K-12, higher education, and industry to promote in-demand college and career pathways for rural students. Rural collaboratives across school districts and in partnership with post-secondary and industry help combine resources in an environment where sometimes resources are scarce. And since many rural areas are geographically spread out, collaboratives can help ensure that proximity is not a barrier for students in accessing post-secondary opportunities. These collaboratives are formed to share resources, leverage voices, design and scale innovative programs, and implement initiatives to promote college and career readiness across multiple school districts and in partnership with post-secondary institutions, industry, philanthropy, and many other partners. So we'll begin today by hearing from Dr. Rachel McLean, Chief of Staff for College at EdNation. Dr. McLean will share about how College at EdNation supports rural school districts across Texas in the redesign of K-12 post-secondary and workforce pathways by connecting rural students to local and regional industry opportunities, as well as supporting districts with accessing and navigating resources to provide early post-secondary opportunities like those dual enrollment opportunities we talked about earlier. College at EdNation was founded in 2019 by the former Roscoe Independent School District Superintendent, Dr. Kim Alexander. Since that time, the effort has been recognized for its groundbreaking work nationally and received just this past year the 2023 ASU GSV Education Innovation Showcase Award. Following Dr. McLean's remarks, we'll have time for an open Q&A with Dr. McLean, so be thinking about throughout her presentation if you have any questions, and we'll facilitate some Q&A with her. And then we will hear from a really distinguished panel of state philanthropic leaders, K-12 leaders, higher education leaders, and workforce leaders discussing opportunities to strengthen rural collaboratives and expand workforce-aligned pathways in rural communities across Tennessee. So I'm now excited to turn to and welcome Dr. Rachel McLean, Chief of Staff for College Ed Edunation, for our keynote presentation. Dr. McLean is a passionate advocate for equal educational opportunities driven by her upbringing in rural North Georgia. Having witnessed firsthand the barriers that impede young people's access to resources and limit their aspirations, Dr. McLean is committed to bridging the gap to higher education and career development. She has served as Chief of Staff for College Ed Edunation since 2021. Contributing to the nonprofit organization's expansion efforts and providing technical assistance to small and rural school districts. Prior to joining the organization, she served as Chief Academic Officer in a rural school district in West Texas, where she played a pivotal role in launching innovative programming for students and educators. Really excited to have Dr. McLean with us this morning, and I hope you will join me in welcoming her. Thank you so much.
Well, howdy. I've just spent the last 2 days at Texas A&M, and those Aggies are serious about their greeting. I've heard so many howdies over the past 48 hours that I'm good. As you heard, I grew up in Georgia, moved to Texas 10 years ago. So this weather, pretty familiar to me, although I've lived in Texas long enough that I can't remember to bring an umbrella with me. So I'm glad to be back where I can see trees and some rain. Collegiate Edunation is a nonprofit. We are founded, as you just heard, by Dr. Kim Alexander. Dr. Alexander was a longtime superintendent in a small school district in West Texas, and the enrollment was declining. The kids were doing okay, good grades, good test scores. But as they were graduating, they might have been saying that they were going to college, but literally, as they walked across the graduation stage, they were falling off a cliff. The best part of their life was over. Dr. Alexander was seeing valedictorians and salutatorians 3 or 4 months after graduation, working at the Dairy Queen or the Dollar General, because that's all that you have in Roscoe, Texas, as employment opportunities, unless you are technically skilled labor. And so he worked with his board in a year-long research study with Texas A&M. So we do a lot of work with Texas A&M, hard for a Georgia Bulldog, but we do it. Texas A&M provides a lot of insights and guidance, research-based support for our model. But he and his board worked through this and came up with what we call a P20 system model. Starts in pre-K and goes all the way through 2 years post-high school, but setting up students for support all the way through graduate school. And we'll talk through that just in a few minutes. What happened, though, in Roscoe was things started turning around. Kids started transferring into the district. Parents recognized that these were supports that were needed. Industry started partnering with the districts or with the district. And so in 2019, Commissioner Mike Morath with Texas Education Agency came to Dr. Alexander and asked, would you consider launching a nonprofit to provide technical assistance to other small and rural school districts across the state to do what you did in Roscoe? And so that was when Collegiate Edunation was born. I can describe it, I can talk about it, but a picture's worth 1,000 words. So I'm going to take just about 3 minutes or so and let you watch this video and hear directly from Dr. Alexander himself and one of our superintendents, but some of our kids too that are in the programs.
Rural America is really not what it used to be. Things are changing too fast now. You can't just get a job and make $15 an hour and have a life where you can take care of your family.
More and more schools are waking up to the fact that they've got to redesign to prepare students for their future rather than our past. Being from Roscoe, being such a small town, you know the people, you know the kids.
This being a rural city, we have a lot of people that are not quite as financially advantaged.
As I became superintendent, our disadvantaged students would do really well in school, good grades and good test scores. But for many of those students, walking across that graduation stage was a little bit like walking off a cliff. The best part of their life was now behind them.
We need to find something we can do better than our neighboring schools, something we can hang our hat on, find our niche.
And that's why part of the reason why the US is constantly pushing math and science, because those are the two things that grow your country is math and science.
It's our responsibility, I think, as educators to try to move them to a better life. Because if we don't do this, who's going to?
We had been declining in enrollment since 1995. And so we got to looking at what can we do to reverse that dynamic and change the future for Roscoe.
It's a top tier academic school, but it's also a trade school for high school kids.
Texas can't fill half of the STEM jobs because of an uneducated workforce. And so that is really the reason that STEM is such a buzzword. That's where the jobs are.
We start them off as seventh graders when they pick their pathways. We start welding with them their eighth grade year. By the time they're seniors, they get out of here and they know what they're doing.
Being around the vet clinic is definitely something I've wanted to do since starting here at school. Growing up and coming to Roscoe when our horizons are expanded and the clinic was an option, and I was more drawn to that than anything. It's just wonderful. I love it here.
High school kids are get one of 4 certifications in my program. They can either get their drone license or they can become Adobe certified in Photoshop, Premiere Pro, or After Effects.
In EduMake, they have a manufacturing class, which they are learning how to actually draw whatever design they are wanting and actually put it on the machine and cut it themselves.
I was 11 years old. I got diagnosed with leukemia. I had 2 nurses that really impacted me while I was going through chemotherapy. They made me realize that I wanted to do the same thing for children, and now I'm on my way to becoming a nurse.
We need to not have just a purely academic model. There needs to be that real world relevance that comes from workforce readiness. A more highly educated rural population is what will lead to the innovation that leads to rural job creation.
To me, that's what true education should really be. It should be focused on academics, but also focusing on what trade, what industry do you want to get into whenever you leave high school?
We figured out a solution how to break generational poverty through higher education. And we're interested in helping anyone and everyone that would like to reduce the time to get that done.
Leaving Roscoe, I was able to graduate with an associate's. And that allowed me to get my teaching degree within a year of being graduated from high school. And that allowed me to teach at 19.
If it wasn't for Roscoe, I probably wouldn't be pursuing a career in vet science, which I'm very grateful for because this is exactly what I want to do.
All my college will be paid for by Hamlin. It's going to be a big plus to my life.
With me, it's always been about winning. And when I was a coach, I knew what winning was. You either had more points or you crossed the finish line first. And so I say all the time, we're interested in the highest student outcomes in the nation for all students.
I've already come out with my doctorate of physical therapy. I'm still here in Sweetwater. I came back to work at the hospital and hopefully take over director.
Never in my life did I ever think this would happen. I'm very proud of him. And so is his father too.
Yo les diría a los jóvenes que tengan muchas ganas de estudiar y si se proponen una meta, le echen muchas ganas al estudio y algún día lo van a lograr. Y así como lo hizo José, muchos lo pueden hacer, todos pueden hacerlo. Si se lo proponen, pueden llegar a hacerlo.
We have, whoops, we have some funding from the Walton Family Foundation, and they sent a crew down from New York to Roscoe to film that video. This is really the challenge that we're facing, not just in rural schools, but in the United States. The expectation for all students has not changed in the US since 1947. All students are expected to graduate from high school. Not all students are expected to do anything post-secondary, just a certain group of students, right? And so here we are in 2023, the exact same expectation. All students graduate from high school. In 1947, if you had a good work ethic and a high school diploma, you were going to be fine. That's not the case today. And then 6 months ago, 12 months ago, something significant happened in our world of education with the release of publicly released of artificial intelligence. We've had another shift, and as educators, rural educators specifically, we're not necessarily keeping track and keeping pace with this level of change. This is what we do, Collegiate EduNation. Our vision is to end generational poverty in rural America. The only way to do that is provide pathways to education that's significant and leads to high wage, high demand careers for our rural students. We do this mission, or our mission is to engage in the public school districts, but it's also coming alongside of rural communities to provide these supports. We're serving about 21,000 students. Most of those are in Texas. We work with a district in West Virginia, Boone County, very impoverished area up in that area of West Virginia. But then we're also in conversations with other states, because what we've seen, this is a common problem. It's not a Texas problem, but we're going to talk about Texas size issues in just a second. But it's, as we cross state lines, it's just a rural dilemma that is across the country. This is data straight from Texas, though. Commit is a partner with us that runs a lot of data. This is pre-COVID, so no excuses, right? The most recent cohort of students who were 8th grade and then tracked 6 years post high school. They had plenty of time to get their degree, get certifications, whatever. In Texas, only 23% of those students completed a certification or a degree post-secondary, 23%. In rural sectors, that's estimated to be about 13%. And again, COVID's off the map. That's not a confounding factor here. That one cohort is $111 billion of lost lifetime earnings in Texas. That's one cohort. This is a Texas-sized problem. But your data, when you're talking about somewhere around 52% of your rural students are going to college, I'm curious to know what percent of your students are completing college, because that's what we're seeing. They start, or they intend to start, they take out student loans, and then they do not finish. And so then they're in low wage, low demand jobs with the burden of student debt hanging over them. And it's an endless cycle. There's also some data points that we take very seriously. This is from 2021 national study by EAB. Of the new jobs that are being created, 99% of those are requiring something 2 or 4 years. And we're not talking about traditional college degrees. You saw in the video, we're building programs of study for technical degrees. And that is a huge demand in Texas, that mid-skill level of worker. And so build programs of study for that. So a 2-year degree may be an Associates of Applied Science. It might be a level 1, level 2 certificate from the technical schools, or it might be all the way up to a bachelor's degree and beyond. But we know what we're doing, if we just stick to the K-12 silo, we are asking children to run a race that's 500 meters when they really need to run a race for 600 meters to be successful, to finish. And so we are trying to work intentionally to break down those silos, but then also remove the barriers for these students. When you are dealing with generational poverty, one of the very first barriers that happens in their household is that the parents aren't encouraging students to go on to college, do something post-secondary. And it's not that they're bad parents, it's just that's kind of their frame of reference and their understanding. And they do not see college as something that is attainable. And so when we're building out systems and providing technical assistance to these rural and small communities, that's one of the first things that we communicate. The P in our P20 system model stands for pre-K. So as I said, we work with Texas A&M a lot, and we have professors come and do a kind of a culture mindset training as we start working for a district. And Dr. Gary Briers is one of those presenters, and he consistently says the P really should stand for prenatal, but we can't get them until they're 3 years old. So that's our pre-K part. But if we bring these students up, regardless of their backgrounds, regardless of the barriers that they are having in their home life, with that, if you are a student in Roscoe Collegiate ISD or Hamlin Collegiate ISD, you will be a college and career going student when you get to high school. And we're going to provide the resources and supports to do that. But then other barriers happen all along the way. Something as small as a $300 parking permit fee that a kid or student gets in August as they've got everything else arranged to go off to college. $300 for an economically disadvantaged student and an economically disadvantaged parent can burn those dreams and plans down. And so we're just working to remove as many of those barriers as possible for all students. These are our kind of our goals that we set out for our district partners. We want 90% of our students graduating with an associate degree. Again, college, the definition of college has changed. So when I say associate degree, I'm not talking about liberal arts degrees. I'm talking about technical degrees, something that is leading to a high wage, high demand career based upon the workforce data in your small and rural community or in your region. That's a lofty goal, but we set these high expectations because we know if we've got a benchmark here, and we're going to hit it at 60 or 70%, we're still filling in that gap above that 23% or 13% that data is showing us is existing in Texas. But then we're also extremely intentional about aligning those expectations of the associate degree by the time you graduate from high school with a program of study to access to go to bachelor's degrees onto graduate degrees. That's really where we kind of operate with our school districts, with our community college partners and our higher ed universities to make sure that there's a streamlined pathway that a student can go as far as they want to go. We never want to track a student into a lower level of expectation because of their economic situation, the color of their skin, any other barriers that might be impacting their life outside of their economic status. And so we want to make sure that we are telling students from the get-go, pre-K on, you can go as far as you want to go. You saw that in the video. Dr. Rangel is our very first P20 graduate. His mom is the custodian at Roscoe Collegiate, and his dad actually doesn't speak English and is a farmhand in our community. Dr. Rangel completed his degree and came back, and he says, I came back to work in Sweetwater. Sweetwater is the larger town next to Roscoe with 10,000 people, and Roscoe has about 1,000 people. And so that's where Dr. Rangel works at the hospital there. But he's there in his community and is a product of what this system can be. This is just a graphic. Texas is a big state. We have the school districts across the state. Our model aligns with our land grant institution. So all land grants, every state has one, and they are charged, land grants are charged with providing support to rural communities in their state. And so we partner with A&M and then the AgriLife Extension, which is the 4-H piece of our model that we'll talk about. But through the AgriLife Extension model, we have established a regional model district. And those model districts are charged with sharing out resources to their areas, giving support to other small and rural school districts, inviting them in for tours, all the things that can help communicate that this is a very possible and feasible model in rural Texas, and it's producing results. Our goal is that we want to be at 60 districts by 2026. That aligns to a Texas standard, Texas 2036. And so we are diligently working towards that target in Texas. This is really kind of the framework we operate in. We do a lot of work with Dr. Bill Daggett out of the Successful Practices Network. And Dr. Daggett, we've partnered with him over the last several years to look at trends and changes in education. Obviously, artificial intelligence has had a huge impact in that. But what Dr. Daggett will say, if you've heard any of his presentations or engaged with his research, is that if an algorithm for a task can be written, that job is gone. And we're starting to see that. Like, it's not, like Terminator and end of days kind of thing. We're starting to see that, right? And so what we as educators are needing to intentionally do, and from a rural perspective, making sure that we are not letting rural students and rural educators fall behind even further because of this kind of sea change that's happening. We've got to design instructional practices with high level of rigor, so that creating that evaluating process that can't be outsourced by AI, with high levels of relevance. What is the workforce? What is the community? How do we bring real world relevance into the classroom? And so that's that quadrant D that we operate in when we're designing our framework. What does that look like? So these are two young ladies. They're seniors, or they just graduated from Roscoe this past May. And they have been doing research their entire high school career aligned to their program of study, which is animal science, on artificial insemination of beef cattle for reproduction purposes. At the vet clinic in Roscoe, we have an embryology lab, and students literally work in the field with the cattle, collecting oocytes, and they work with the embryologists. They create these eggs and that are implanted into the cow. And you can actually design your own designer cow, pick your color, pick your look, pick your type of hide, all the things. And so these young ladies have been doing that for 4 years. They both graduated with their associates. And one is continuing on into the vet med field, and one, I believe, is going into education. Her mom is an educator. But they just placed third in the nation at the FFA National Conference with their research project. Things that can't be outsourced by AI. And these young ladies can communicate, collaborate, they've got critical thinking skills. And those are the type of skills that we are wanting to produce, in addition to the technical degrees, the college education, the career prep. This is a graphic of our student journey. As a student comes into a collegiate education district, we really focus heavily on experiential learning down at the elementary level. In some districts, that looks like Montessori. Roscoe, for example, runs a Montessori pre-K kinder, where students are move at their own pace, but it's a very strong framework. Several of our districts have started pre-K kinder, and then because of the demand of Montessori, they've moved it up to elementary. Texas does have a pretty punitive A through F accountability system based off of a high stakes test that, I'm sure everybody needs to be able to bubble in multiple choice questions to be successful in your career. But Montessori and the high stakes testing, it's kind of hitting it up against each other. And so we always say we're really doing more Montessori at our elementary level, because we can't really do true Montessori. So that experiential learning down at elementary, that transitions to blended learning by middle school. So students are developing their own choice and voice and student agency of their educational learning. That's critical, because what happens in our model is by 9th grade, students are starting with dual credit classes. And so that gives them the ability to earn their associate degree if they're all on time, all on track, before actually they graduate from high school. Those associate degrees can be anything from associates of arts, associates of science, associates of applied science. Those are those technical degrees, associates of arts and teaching. And then in Texas, Texas Education Agency has created a funding mechanism under the P-TECH umbrella, where districts can opt to receive 2 years of additional funding beyond high school. So you have to be designated as a P-TECH Academy under the Texas Education Agency. So P-TECH is a national, international model. Anybody can do it. Texas has just opted to fund it. And so those students that continue to stay in the district can draw down their full weighted average daily attendance ADA funding for because you're enrolling them in CTE classes as they are completing their bachelor's degree. So we work with our districts and specifically West Texas A&M. It's in the A&M system, but it's up in the Panhandle, and have created the ability for West Texas A&M to accept more credits from our community college, up to 80 hours at the community college, and they transfer those in to the bachelor's degree. So we're sitting at around a $10,000 to $12,000 bachelor's degree. That's about the amount of dollars that the district can pull down with full weighted ADA funding for those students. So that pathway is there for a student to earn their bachelor's degree for free. And it's not just a hypothetical. We've done it. We have multiple cohorts. Our very first cohort that did this out of Roscoe, 7 highly disadvantaged students, designated at risk, economically impacted. Those 7 students went on to West Texas A&M, but they didn't physically go to West Texas A&M. We brought the degrees to the community. And so the students had a high school level support system with a counselor that was there working with them. And they all graduated on time or before time, higher GPA than the average West Texas A&M student, and with 0 college debt. We do several different programs of study. These are more of our standard programs of study. Advanced manufacturing, mechatronics. We combine that with a robotics program. We do an education and training program that uses a teacher apprenticeship model. We also offer the animal embryology that I spoke about with the young ladies from Roscoe. And we're just launching a cybersecurity program of study that's really more focused on certifications than degrees, because in Texas, if you graduate with these 4 certifications, you also can leave high school earning $75,000 a year. We have a One Health initiative that we're supporting multiple programs of study in animal health, human health, and environmental health. And other areas that we support, we want to make sure that we are building communities within our districts and going beyond that A through F system, establishing those higher ed partnerships with our community colleges and university partners. A barrier in rural Texas that we'll probably talk about in the Q&A is how do we get workforce experiences in our rural communities when there's teeny tiny towns. So we build out internships and apprenticeships through school operated businesses. That was the EduVet that you saw. Funding opportunities, it costs some money. And so this is, we seek out a lot of different funding supports, workforce development grants, education grants, and to help support this model. But basically, we're designing a 3-pronged stool. We want students ready, college ready, and that's indicated by their attainment of college degrees, workforce ready, that's the workforce certifications, but then also life ready. And that's the a piece that we really haven't talked a whole lot about, but that's the age appropriate research that we ask students to engage in and that problem-based instruction in our model. So that's just a quick overview of CEN and what we do and what our districts are doing. And so looking forward to answering some questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that presentation. I'll just maybe start off with 1 or 2 questions, and then we'll open it up for questions from folks who are joining us today. Really fascinated by how much you're already thinking about how things like AI are changing workforce needs and what preparation looks like. And would love for you to talk a little bit more about how you've prioritized specifically what you're hearing from industry. What does that conversation look like? What does that relationship look like? And how have you built pathways and programs really focused around those workforce needs?
So in each of our communities, like I said, Texas is a big state. We start with workforce data. And so what are the regional and the local demands for high wage, high demand careers. And so if, and sometimes these are hills to die on. We'll always have a district say, well, I've got a floral design program, or I want to do cosmetology. And those are not great careers, whatever. We need florists. Lord knows we need hairstylists. But if we're preparing students for high wage, high demand careers, how many hairstylists can a community of 500 to 1,000 people actually need, right? And so we have those hard conversations as far as what are our programs of study that we're going to choose and that you're going to choose as your district, but we've got to back that up with data. And so our workforce provides that information, but we are also looking at state and national opportunities. If COVID taught us anything, it makes rural look really nice. Like it was so nice to be living out in the wide open spaces during the COVID times. And we have districts that are preparing students for those careers in coding and cyber, that they can live and work in their rural communities, but they are supporting companies wherever. One of our districts out in East Texas is Cumbie, and they have a partnership with TechSmart, which is a Seattle company. And those students are coding from elementary on. By the time they graduate high school, they've got multiple certifications, and TechSmart is hiring them, or they're able to go to work in other companies throughout the country.
Second question I have. So you talked about, I was very interested in hearing about the state grants that you're able to take advantage of, and the 2 years of additional funding that the state is providing. Could you talk a little bit more about, are there any other policy levers that the state has pulled that have enabled this kind of work? Other state resources that you think are particularly interesting or innovative? I know we have policymakers in this room in Tennessee who are joining us today, and I know they're always interested in hearing about what other states are doing. So just would be curious if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yes. So the biggest impact for our model is 2 legislative sessions ago. So not the one that just finished, but the one, and Texas only meets every 2 years in the legislative session. 2 sessions ago, the House Bill 3 was introduced, and Texas created incentives, CCMR, College Career Military Readiness incentives for districts to support economically disadvantaged students, all students, the economically disadvantaged and special ed, in the attainment of associate degrees before they graduate, or the completion of TSI, which is the Texas Success Initiative. It's like ACT for community college in Texas. And so if a student is TSIA complete and enrolls and attends college in the fall following their graduation, or they have an associate degree, or they're TSIA complete and they have an industry certification, or they enroll in the military. So those 4 options. Districts can receive up to $7,000 based off of the economic status of the student, if they're a special needs student, or if they're just a student, they can still receive $3,000. That's significant money when you are tapping into that resource. Our districts aren't tapping into it. Dallas ISD, one of our largest school districts, left $40 million on the table by not tapping into that. Now, it like anything else, it's a big ship to turn, and so Dallas ISD is doing a better job of tapping into that. But in general, our rural districts are leaving that funding on the table. That's the continuation funding. TEA has invested in startup funds. We have a couple different pathways of startup funds for schools that are academically struggling. There's what's called a school action fund, $700,000 over 3 years. And the districts get technical assistance to help do rural redesign of their districts, and that, but you have to be academically struggling. If you're not academically struggling, because plenty of districts in Texas are A districts, but their students are graduating and they're not going where they need to go. And so we have a lot of A and B districts that are recognizing that. There's some startup funds for PTech grants. We do a lot of philanthropic type work to try and get additional startup funds. And then through tri-agency alignment, so with the TEA and Texas Workforce Commission, those 2 entities have started offering JET grants, and those are significant. And so that's funding that you can have to buy equipment. You can't pay salaries, you can't do supplies, but equipment for our labs. And so we have districts that have tapped into that with robotics labs, medical labs, a lot of different areas.
We will open it up for questions from folks who are joining us today. And I will also say, if any of our panelists also want to ask questions, they can too. You're allowed to do that if you'd like. Yes, Burton.
Hi, Burton Williams, the Ayers Foundation Trust. You mentioned barrier removers or removing barriers. I would love to hear any unique challenges that you all have had to waiting lists at your technical colleges and your instruction or instructors that are certified to teach in those programs.
That's a great question. So we try to support districts in embedding professors at the high school level. And so our technical college, TSTC in Texas, does a credentialing process. And so workforce credentials will allow teachers to be able to teach dual credit. At the community college level, 18 hours in that core expertise level. So one of the things that TEA has supported in this area, they issue grants to to districts to pay for teachers to go and get their master's degree. And so that's a support. And this is just the reality of where we're at, we do a lot of virtual education because our districts are educational islands. We're not going to get kids to drive 90 minutes. We don't want them driving 90 minutes to 2 hours to get to a higher ed partner. So we're zooming those things in. We've got asynchronous type support that they're earning dual credit. But trying to get our actual teachers credentialed to be able to do that is one of the barriers. The enrollment numbers at our technical colleges, all of our districts have a community college partner. Those college partners are sometimes sitting in small towns and they are desperate for students. And so the only time we run up against numbers and enrollment barriers, if we've got districts that are partnering with community colleges in our larger metropolitan areas, San Antonio has some issues, Dallas always full. That's a barrier, and we just navigate around by going to other community college partners because we're bringing those online resources in. And then high demand positions, high demand programs of study like healthcare. Can only take so many healthcare students in a program of study. Well, the demand is great. So we are working with Texas A&M and a One Health initiative. Again, that's the land grant. They're charged with rural education support and rural economic development. And so we're bringing those nursing students, med students to the rural communities. And those are where their kids are getting those clinical hours and that expertise. That's just a little, that was us trying to navigate around that barrier. It might not work when you cross state lines, but Texas A&M was dedicated to being able to impact rural medicine. So that's been a good partnership for us.
The questions? Yes, Nathan. I think we've got a mic coming for you.
Thank you. So in this program to provide grants for master's degrees for, you're talking about high school faculty to get their master's degree in the subject matter so that they'd be SACSOC accredited, right, to be a professor of that particular subject, right? And do they remain employees of the LEA, or do they become full employee? How does that work?
They are employees of the LEA. Most of our community colleges want them to be designated as an adjunct. And so that gives them the legal support that they need as well. Some of our community colleges give those teachers stipends to be adjunct, and then some of them is just, you're an adjunct. Most all of our districts pay a stipend for their master's degree. And then if the district through grant funds has paid for your master's, typically we're getting those teachers to sign MOUs, so you have to hang out with them for a few years after getting their degree, because that's a barrier, the turnover and the loss of rural teachers and high quality rural teachers. And so we're trying to grow our own. If we figure if they come up through the community, they like living in their community and they want to be an educator, they'll stay in that community. You saw in the video, Martine, he's a Roscoe kid. He came all the way through the system and now he's teaching. And those are our best ones to understand rural and stay in rural. And so that's the other area that we're pushing that. Now, Martine, he's not working on his master's right now, but he has the ability to through those grant funds if he wanted to.
Well, join me in thanking Dr. McLean for her time today and presentation. Thank you so much. Right. Really, really interesting conversation. Collegiate Edu is doing really, really interesting work. So thank you for that presentation. Would now like to ask our Tennessee leaders to join us up front, who are here for our panel discussion as we look to the work happening in Tennessee. And I'm just would want to start this discussion by introducing the moderator for our panel, Janet Ayers. Janet serves as president of the Ayers Foundation, and I think probably is leading and doing more than anyone else in our state in showing what's possible for rural students and rural outcomes in Tennessee. For over 20 years, the Ayers Foundation has served rural students across the state through the Scholars Program, a comprehensive college access and success program that has significantly improved college-going persistence and completion. Janet also is a recognized business leader and philanthropist with over 20 years of experience in healthcare administration and continues to be active on a number of boards across our state, including SCORE's board of directors. Janet, thanks so much for being here today, for moderating this panel. I will turn it over to you to kick it off and also to introduce our other panelists. Thanks, Janet.
David, I will have to say that I am just genuinely excited. The Ayers Foundation Trust is doing a lot of this work, as David said, and as we've discovered over the last 20 some years, we've really discovered how to get our students to and through in these rural communities post-secondary education, whether it's 2-year technical school, community college, or whatever. And what we've realized is we've done a great job educating students. But to your point, Dr. McLean, we were watching these students leave the communities, and there's just a lot, Dr. McLean, that you discussed that I think everybody in this room's head is just full of ideas and excitement and energy. And the state of Tennessee right now is very poised to make a huge difference in the rural space. And so, David, thank you. Thank you for pulling this group together. I am excited about the Tennessee leaders next to me, and it's good to see this group. Because of the age of COVID, a couple of the panelists I've only seen by Zoom, so I actually get to see them in person today. So it's a real treat. First on our panel is Mrs. Lillian Hartgrove. She was one of the ones on our Zoom panel. Our state of Tennessee passed some groundbreaking legislation that funded our education system, but I think the rural subcommittee was able to get some really good work done on funding and some innovative things in these rural communities. She is currently serving as the chairman emeritus of the Tennessee State Board of Education after completing 5 years as chairman and 9 total years on the board. Prior to joining the board, Mrs. Hartgrove had a 33-year banking career with SunTrust, now Truist Banks, and later served as Highlands Economic Development VP and Workforce Development and Education VP for a multi-county economic development organization. Her work led to partnerships with K-12 school districts, higher education, employers, and nonprofit organizations to address college and career readiness of students in the region. I'm looking forward to hearing your discussions, Lillian. Next on our panel is Chairman Chris Hurt. He's a state representative for the 82nd District in the Tennessee General Assembly, representing Lauderdale, Crockett, Gibson, and Obion counties. First elected in 2018, Chairman Hurt has served for 2 terms and currently serves as the chair of the Corrections Subcommittee, as well as a member of the Education Administration Committee, K-12 Subcommittee, Agriculture and Natural Resources Committee, and State Government Committee. When he is not serving his district, Chairman Hurt is a real estate broker and is also heavily involved with his family in agriculture. Previously, Chairman Hurt taught at Halls High School for 14 years. Welcome. Looking forward to hearing from you as well. As you can tell, our panel has a deep, deep interest and roots into our rural communities. And last on our panel is Sean Kimball, who also served on that rural subcommittee, is the Director of Schools in Lauderdale County Schools. And I'm happy to say is one of our newest members of our expansion with the Ayers Foundation Trust. So we're excited to work with you, Sean. Under Sean's leadership, Lauderdale County Schools has expanded early post-secondary opportunities, strengthened high-quality career and technical education pathways, and committed to ensuring all students will be prepared for post-secondary education or the workforce upon graduation. As West Tennessee prepares for the opening of the Blue Oval City mega site, Sean has also worked closely with nearby K-12 districts to develop a rural district collaborative to ensure students are prepared for the jobs of the future that the Blue Oval City development will bring to the region. Please join me in welcoming our great panel today, this morning. Now the good stuff. You get to hear from you all. I'd like to begin with a question for all of you, and I'll just start with my left to right wing for answers, but Dr. McClain just shared some amazing work happening in rural Texas. What do you see as the greatest need to ensure Tennessee students in rural communities have the supports they need to ensure their education experiences lead to a career? And what resonated most with you from Dr. McClain's presentation as you think about how to solve for those needs? Lillian?
Well, I'd like to start out by saying I do believe it is about access for these students. And I say access to programs of study that are aligned with needs of the employers as well as the students themselves. What are their interests? What are their skill sets? Also access to early post-secondary opportunities, work-based learning opportunities, internships, apprenticeships, and so many of the things that we've heard from Dr. McClain. And I think for us, it really is about coming up with a long-term sustainable solution. And I think taking some of the key learnings that we heard today from Dr. McClain would be very wise on our part. And the biggest part for me in listening to her, because so much of what she was saying was resonating in comparison to the work that I did in the Upper Cumberland region with the rural districts. And that is, it really does take stakeholders. It does take bringing people together to address challenges that are exist in the rural areas, and what you can accomplish when you have buy-in and support from all of these various stakeholders who are willing to do this work because they understand the impact, the positive impact to the individual students, the local economy, and the future of a community to continue to grow and thrive. And that we know sometimes the rural community itself will not attract the employers, but sometimes they can, and sometimes they do. But you have the neighboring counties that are also counting on those rural counties adjacent to them for the workforce. And so I've spoken with directors of schools who have said, you know what, I want my students to get the education and to be able to go to the neighboring county because I don't have anything for them here. But I think if we could adopt a model similar to that made sense for Tennessee, that would be my key takeaway from what Dr. McClain shared. Thank you.
Well, I would agree, and hearing a lot of what she said resonated from what I saw when I was teaching and what I've seen since I've been elected. But the one thing that stood out to me is across the board, we're facing a shortage of teachers for various reasons. And when you talk about the vocational STEM areas, it's a huge obstacle. As I visited districts and had discussions with getting instructors, keeping those class sizes small enough in order for those instructors to give good instruction to the students. And as TISA, our new funding formula, rolls out, there's a large incentive there for those classes and for those directions for our students. And that creates a larger demand for instructors and qualified instructors. We don't want to drop standards in any way. But I do think that was something she mentioned that they face, that we face also. We've seen some legislation the last year or two trying to be a little bit creative on how to do that and get those instructors in front of students. But hopefully we can continue to work on that and help districts and provide quality instructors for those areas.
Thank you, Sean.
Yeah, I don't know that I can say a whole lot more than my fellow panelists because they hit the nail on the head. But I do think that one of the things, and this is a very simple concept from the presentation, is that a high school diploma, just a high school diploma, is doesn't have the value that it once had. And I think making sure that schools across our state and across the nation aren't just using early post-secondary opportunities as a checklist. Like, okay, these students have 5 or 6 episodes, and so now we can feel successful and move on. But what good are those if they don't tie to some type of career opportunity or to take them to that next level for higher education? So I think that was something I took away, that we really have tried to refocus our energies in Lauderdale County over the last few years. Is graduation is not the only step for our students, that we have so much more impact and potential beyond that. So that's a really important takeaway for me, to continue to try to realign that work in our district. And I think the other thing that we absolutely must have, and I have to say that it's been a great space to work in for the last few years, where our governor has really, and the legislature, the General Assembly, has really invested heavily in career and technical education. And I would say that we need to make sure that we continue that investment, because we heard throughout the presentation that technologies change, the areas of focus changes, and so we have to have those investments to be able to keep up with the technology and the changes that are coming in career and technical education. So for me, continuing that investment and knowing how important that is in our state is something we must definitely do.
Great, thanks. I'd like to follow up with some of your thoughts, just for specific questions for each of you. And Lillian, I'm sorry, you're to my left. I'll start with you again. You have had significant experience in leading rural workforce development in Tennessee through your service with Highlands Economic Partnership, as well as your service many years on the State Board of Education. From your perspective, leading rural economic development collaboratives and on the board, can you share an example of how workforce development initiatives in local communities can help unique rural needs?
Yes, I think I can. I did this work, it started in around 2009, working with employers and listening to them, especially I was doing economic development and trying to meet the needs of the existing industries while still trying to attract new industry. And I kept hearing over and over again from existing industries, we cannot find the workforce that we need. And so trying to bridge all that knowledge, that information with the rural communities and working with those that are surrounding where I live in Putnam County. And so I started working with about 6 districts. And what happened is that the smaller, more rural, truly rural communities, their employment base is so small. The education system, the school district, is the largest employer. And then you have mom and pop shops and small restaurants and things of that nature. And so they would struggle with, well, how do we even begin to do this? And so when we formed this collaboration, we were able to bring these smaller counties to the table. And then they became engaged with employers in some of the larger counties, because the reality is their students, as I mentioned earlier, their students would not end up in a viable job in their local community. But everybody, the parents and the superintendent, wanted more for them. And so he and several other she's came to the table and said, we want to be a part of this. One other example, though, we had a district superintendent who said, well, we're just going to offer health science. We were doing pathways. We're just going to do health science, and we're going to continue to do cosmetology. And they had something like 2 to 3 teachers who were in cosmetology. And through the process of the collaboration and being at the table with all of these other stakeholders, she heard the importance of mechatronics, information technology, and other opportunities. She secured a building with the approval of her local school board and county commission, and she launched an academy to be able to put all of these different pathways in under one roof. And she has all these students who are going through these programs. It simply would not have worked and would have not have happened if not for the collaborative and hearing what was happening in the other counties and things of that nature. So
thank you, Lillian. Sean, you're a rural K through 12 leader, and you've been deeply involved in preparing the community for the opening of Blue Oval City. Can you share a little bit about the work you've been doing to prepare your district for Blue Oval, and more specifically, how collaboration with nearby K-12 partners, as well as post-secondary and industry partners, has played a role in this work?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, this there's never been an investment like this in terms of industry and the state of Tennessee's history. And so we feel we're kind of there on the the back steps of Blue Oval City, and we feel like we have a huge responsibility within our county, but also within the region to make sure that that we're providing our students the opportunities that they need to be successful in whichever career path they choose, but also meeting the needs of all of our industry partners, local and those in the region. So I mentioned earlier about about not just graduating students with diplomas, but with just a high school diploma. We've tried to be very intentional about how we've done that in our district. We're calling it the Diploma Plus program, and our expectation is that every student in our county will graduate with either an associate's degree through our early college program, through a TCAT certificate, because we talk about barriers. Just simply transportation for some of our students is a barrier. They may get half of the hours they need toward a TCAT degree, but they can't get to TCAT once they graduate high school. So we're trying to remove that barrier by getting them that certificate before they graduate high school in a highly needed area. And just the list goes on and on. We have one other program that we're really excited about starting this year called Start Here and Stay Here. Teacher shortage is a real thing. Don't know that we're going to solve our entire problem with this, but we've partnered with UT Martin Ripley, and students can now start in our school district their junior year and complete half of their education degree, and then move right down the street from the school, literally 2 blocks from the school, to continue their education and get their teaching degree. Also ag business, criminal justice, and some other programs that we're doing through the Start Here, Stay Here program. So we have a lot of initiatives off the ground, but we know that there's strength in numbers, the economy of scale. And so the state has encouraged through the Innovative School Model Grant for us to reach out, and we didn't necessarily write our ISM grants to be in collaboration, but it's part of a larger collaboration that we have with Haywood and Tipton County, the Haywood Tipton Lauderdale Consortium, HTL. And we're really working in that space to try to look at regionally, how do we address the workforce needs and do that in a way that provides and floods the market with students that have highly sought after skills. And so we've been working on this initiative for quite some time, and there's a lot more detail to it than that, and I won't get into it all of it today, but we really do want to build a pilot model that others in West Tennessee and across the state of Tennessee can learn from and meet the needs. And again, be something that when an industry or business comes to the region, we could be that example of how you attack that.
It's fantastic. Chris, Chairman Hurt, you've been a champion for education and workforce readiness at the Tennessee General Assembly. Can you share some of the policy opportunities we have in Tennessee to strengthen how rural students are being prepared for the work?
Sure. Thank you for that. As you mentioned, I was fortunate enough to come in. I was elected in 2018, which is when Governor Lee came in. So I have been fortunate enough to and appreciate him and his administration for making rural Tennessee a priority. So it's coming in at that time when all of the rural initiative moved to the forefront. I was excited. And as far as policy opportunities, I mentioned earlier, TISA, the new funding formula that we passed, that's going to be a huge step in the right direction. But most recently, just last session, I carried a bill, I believe it was House Bill 902 with Chairman Watson. I think he carried it in the Senate. And it referred to data. And in Tennessee, we've made a huge investment in collecting all kinds of data. We've done a poor job for some of that intricate data that districts can use, teachers can use, in getting that to where they can find it. I'm not the smartest person out there, but I do know enough that if we can make it simple enough, it'll be utilized more. So our goal was to kind of what I call a one-stop shop, where districts and teachers can go in and get data on students and what they've gone, what direction they've gone, if they've come back to the communities, and kind of use those to make decisions. We ran into a little bit of pushback from the administration on that because they had already started that initiative a couple of years ago. And so we kind of backed off it. We tabled the bill because they felt like if we passed it, it would set them back a little bit for various reasons. So that bill is still out there. We were able to get them in committee and get some answers to hopefully move that to the forefront of their priorities and get some answers, some reports on that by this fall to know what we need to do with that legislation next year. But I think that bill could go a long way in taking some steps to utilize data that the state has invested in that districts and teachers need to utilize, need to be able to access better, I guess.
Chairman Hurt, I can only speak, I think I could speak for the whole room, but I will speak from the Ayers Foundation Trust perspective. Push hard for that data.
We'll continue.
I want to put a huge exclamation point on that. It's important. What I'm hearing, and I'll move to the next question, but just listening to this group, we have such bright leadership in Tennessee, and that data does matter. These special initiatives matter, the funding mattered. And what I'm hearing is not just about the to and through post-secondary, but it's creating opportunities and knowing what that data says. You're exactly right. We are not mining it. We have a lot of things floating out there. I have some people from the Ayers Foundation Trust in here. We have a very robust Salesforce that we use in order to track our thousands of students, but the state needs to be doing a better job than private philanthropy or collaborations between a school district and a community college. It needs to be something statewide. So the initiatives of start home, stay home, and the data push you're doing collectively, I really do feel like Tennessee is very postured with the leadership we have, that rural Tennessee can be the driver in economic change. I think we have a real
And
possibility.
if I could echo that, I'm not sure that can you hear me? If I could echo that, because I can tell you at the State Board of Education, we're often asking for the data, and we want to make our decisions based on the evidence, based on the information. And so I want to echo that push for sure. And
Yes, ma'am.
thank you.
No pressure, Chairman Hurt. Okay, this question is for everyone. What is one barrier that rural students face to being prepared for college and career that you want to highlight for us today? And I'm going to start with you, Sean.
Yeah, I don't want to beat a dead horse. And I think I can say that because we're in a rural collaborative, right? That's my Perry County, Tennessee coming out in me. But having just to what Chairman Hurt said a few moments ago, qualified teachers, folks, and I'm saying this from where I sit in rural Tennessee, the teacher shortage is a 4-alarm fire. And I can't speak for every rural district or every district in the state, but when I'm in meetings with fellow superintendents from rural districts, when I mention that or we talk about it, I get a lot of head nods. It's alarming. And not only is it alarming and difficult to find any qualified human that has the teacher credentials to sit in a classroom to teach kids, we can't select, we just have to take what we can get. And then when you start talking about mechatronics and advanced manufacturing and all of the highly technical and specific training that people need, not to mention the skills of being passionate about the work and loving kids, just having the credentials for that is very, to find someone is very difficult. So I think that is maybe an indirect barrier to students, but one that will certainly have a long lasting impact because we're doing a lot of work in Tennessee to innovate. We're doing a lot of work in our district and our region to innovate, but if you can't staff those positions, you're not going to be very successful, and that it's an emergency.
Lillian, what about you?
I have the same answer. He's been reading my mind. Honestly, because it is a big problem, and it wouldn't surprise me if everybody in this room would have the same answer. We hear it on the board. I hear it when I attend superintendent study councils. It's important to hear the challenges that they're facing. And we hear it about different content areas and different grade levels, et cetera. But oftentimes it is the career technical educator that's a real struggle. And in particular, you're trying to attract somebody that comes from industry that has the desire to either retire early and go into the classroom or to give up a salary that is much higher than the salary that they're earning in the private sector. And so we have some opportunities, and Nathan James with the state board and I were talking about this earlier. The TISA funding does provide for career technical education funding, but there's that connection from the high school to the post-secondary institution, in particular, the TCATs. The TCATs are heavily involved with the school districts. And I know that from my work prior to serving on the state board. If you don't have that relationship with the TCAT, then you're often struggling to be able to offer the program you want to offer in your high school. And this started in one of the counties with mechatronics. the school system couldn't find the mechatronics teacher, but the TCAT could. And so the partnership was agreed upon that the TCAT would provide the instructor. But sometimes it's even difficult for the TCAT to attract the right person. So sometimes when you can bring those resources together, perhaps you can hire that person who wants to earn a higher salary because they're accustomed to it in the labor market. So it's the same answer virtually.
Chairman?
Along with what they said, I totally agreed, mentioned that earlier, but I would kind of touch on two other areas that maybe aren't talked about quite as much. It was mentioned in the presentation earlier about finances as they get into higher ed and how a $300 books or whatever can be an obstacle for students. I think we're still facing that. We have seen various creative ways to try to approach that, and there are some resources out there for students just to make sure those students know that. Transportation, again, I appreciate the effort that districts have made in transportation for students in high school, K-12. But as they graduate and being able to continue that and the transportation to get where they need to be, because, you know, in my county, Sean's district, some of them live 30 miles from the school or further. And I know across the state of Tennessee, there's further than that, but that can be an obstacle. And the last thing I would mention that was brought to my attention just about 2 months ago, talking to a student, was continuing to have these conversations to when the areas students go into, that they can grow in those vocations. I was talking to a student and he told me, he still called me coach. He said, Coach Hurt, he said, I love what I'm doing. And he said, but I don't want to do that for the rest of my life. And I told him, I said, well, you know, you can work into management, you can work into open your own business, things like that moving forward. So continuing, and I think in that same discussion, you have a lot of parents that may kind of step back and go, well, that's good for when you're 30, 40, but as you get older, you don't want to be lifting and doing that the rest of your life, but making sure that even parents and students both understand that you can grow in that field and move up and continue to move up. And you may not be doing that the rest of your life. So that's just kind of something that hadn't really been mentioned, but I do think would help kind of help our students as parents steer their students on what direction to go.
Thank you. This is lightning round. So lightning is lightning. We'll be really fast. I'm just going to, as we close out today, and there's just so much for us to think of. I think what today is just leads us to the next steps. But what is one thing we can do to support students in rural areas to be prepared for today's workforce needs? Start with you, Chairman.
Ooh, repeat that again.
What is one action that we need to take in the next year to support students in rural areas to be prepared for today's workforce needs?
Just continuing to fund vocational. Sean mentioned it, as things change and as we go forward, we need to continue that funding at a level that districts can use and stay ahead of the game on.
Lillian?
I would say that this is more complicated, but I think you have to start somewhere. We've had different initiatives that have launched across the state during multiple administrations, and we seem to shift every time there's a change in administration. So I'm wondering, based on what we heard today from Dr. McLean, if we could find the right stakeholder, intermediary organization, SCORE, an entity that would develop a model that would also be sustained by the proper amount of funding to ensure that the work, the pockets, the work that's already happening and the work that has yet to begin will in fact happen and continue in perpetuity, if you will. So,
Sean?
Wow, there's a lot. But I think as I've worked with my colleagues in Haywood and Tipton County as we've tried to work on this rural kind of consortium. We've realized the number of resources and the things that we're missing. So I think as a state, if we could really look at, and this is no criticism on anyone, but you know, ECD is working in their silo or in their area to prepare for Blue Oval City in West Tennessee. K-12's working in their space, higher ed's working in their space. If we could come together, and I said the attack earlier, when we get this kind of investment in a region or an area, if we could come together, all of those people at the table and share resources, because we've learned there's a lot of resources out there that K-12 didn't know about that we now can tap into just because we ask. or we're communicating, collaborating. So I would just think that we could continue to open up those doors to come together across multiple departments and figure out a way to attack a really big investment and a really big issue in West Tennessee. I think would be a great big help to everyone.
Well, that concludes our panel, and I think the words of the day are collaboration, data, and barrier removers. And I look forward to working with everybody on this because I think we are going to transform rural Tennessee, and I think we're right on the cusp of some great things. So, David,
Great.
thank you for putting this together.
Will you all join me in thanking this amazing panel for their perspectives? Thank you so much, Janet, for facilitating that conversation. Lillian, I just want you to know I was paying attention to what you were saying. I thank you for the charge. Yep, there. I appreciate that. As we close today, I just want to share a couple quick sort of reflections and things that we're thinking about at SCORE around how to elevate and continue to advance this work. Sort of 3 ideas that I'd maybe put on the table for continued work. One, we heard a lot about these innovative school model grants, and I think we're thinking a lot about what it could look like to expand that kind of work and that kind of investment across our state to provide additional focus on rural collaboratives and staffing related to rural work. As we heard, obviously, Tennessee has existing innovative school model grants to encourage school districts to innovate, and think there's an opportunity for this model to provide additional resources to school districts located in rural communities who want to collaborate across districts and with their higher education partners and industry. The second, we heard a lot about staffing, and I think there's an opportunity as a state to incentivize staffing strategies that expand access to qualified instructors. Certainly know, and we heard that access to qualified instructors is often a barrier to access and dual enrollment or career and technical education. And so we're sort of elevating and in many ways kind of recommending that we think as a state about stipends to support multiple school districts, to think about sharing instructors and to recruit instructors across districts. And then third, just would sort of double click, underline, bold this conversation around data and really elevate and continue to identify opportunities to provide state investment in local collaboratives to share data across sets of partners. So SCORE stands ready to support the leaders in this room in advancing this continued conversation. And obviously our discussion today is just one of many that we will be having throughout the remainder of the summer to elevate innovations that exist around this transition and pathway from education into work. Finally, just want to mention this is a part of a 5-part series of conversations that we're having throughout the summer. We just want to go ahead and preview that our conversation next month will be looking specifically at challenges and opportunities that exist in supporting Black male students in our state in transitioning from education into work. We certainly know that data show that Black male students tend to be underserved across K-12 and higher education. And so we'll explore some innovative strategies to support those students in earning degrees and credentials with workforce value. So we'll be sending out a link later this month to that event and look forward to having you with us. Thank you all again for being with us. Dr. McLean, thank you for being with us today from Texas. Thank you to our amazing panelists, and we are adjourned.